The river does not announce the jaguar's arrival. On darker nights, it barely reflects the sky at all, absorbing what little light exists and breaking it into fragments that slide between floating leaves and slow-moving debris. Along its edges, the forest loosens, roots exposed, mud soft, tracks erased almost as quickly as they are made. This is where the jaguar becomes something else, not faster, not stronger, less visible. The cat does not need total darkness, it needs uncertainty. And when the sky fails to draw clean silhouettes, uncertainty spreads through every prey species that drinks, grazes, or crosses here. Most Amazonian prey are not blind at night. Their eyes are adapted for low light, but they depend on contrast more than clarity. The outline of a moving shape against a slightly brighter background is often enough to trigger flight. On clearer nights, prey read the riverbank as a layered scene. Open water lighter than forest, trunks darker than leaves, movement interrupting pattern. When that structure collapses, when sky, canopy, and water blur into the same tone, the visual system still works, but it works slower, a fraction of a second longer to identify shape, another fraction to decide direction. That compression of reaction time is not dramatic, but it is decisive. The jaguar exploits this compression with a precision that feels almost calculated. It does not stalk constantly, it waits. Muscle temperature stays low, conserving energy in the humid heat. When it moves, the motion is minimal and deliberate, chosen to avoid rustling foliage or splashing water. Sound on these nights becomes a secondary problem for prey as well. Rain earlier in the evening, insects calling in waves, frogs pulsing along the banks, all of it creates acoustic clutter. Prey animals that rely on sudden silence or sharp directional noise lose one of their last warning systems. By the time the jaguar commits, the distance is already too short. River edges magnify this advantage. Prey are drawn here for reasons that have nothing to do with predators. Water access, mineral-rich mud, cooler temperatures, and escape routes from other threats. Tapirs wade in to cool their bodies and ease parasite loads. Capybaras cluster where grasses are richest. Deer step carefully to drink, trading exposure for hydration. On darker nights, these congregations persist longer because perceived risk feels lower. The absence of visible movement reads as safety. It is a false signal. When the jaguar strikes under these conditions, the kill is often quicker and closer to water than usual. A powerful bite to the skull, delivered with astonishing accuracy, ends the struggle before alarm can ripple outward. Blood mixes with river silt. The body is dragged only a short distance, sometimes not at all. The cat feeds efficiently and withdraws, leaving behind more than remains. It leaves concentration. Carcasses near river edges do not disperse evenly into the ecosystem. They anchor activity. Scavengers converge quickly. Vultures from above, caimans from the water, small carnivores and omnivores from the understory. Insects arrive first, and in overwhelming numbers. Blowflies detect the chemical signature of death within minutes, laying eggs in soft tissue before larger animals even arrive. Beetles follow, specializing in skin, hair, or bone. Each group accelerates decomposition, but also multiplies presence. Where one carcass appears, movement increases. Where movement increases, so does contact. This clustering has consequences that extend beyond the obvious recycling of nutrients. Parasites hitch rides between hosts drawn to the same site. Bacteria flourish in warm, moist conditions, enriched by blood and decay. Pathogens that might struggle to persist in a more diffuse environment suddenly find density working in their favor. Scavengers pick up ticks. Flies move from carcass to living animals. Water near the site becomes biologically noisy, loaded with organic matter that feeds microbial blooms. The river edge, already a crossroads, turns into a hotspot. For prey species, this creates a delayed cost. Individuals that avoided predation may still pass through contaminated zones days later, picking up parasites or ingesting water with elevated bacterial loads. Juveniles are particularly vulnerable. Their immune systems are still developing, and small energetic setbacks, loss of appetite, mild infection, can cascade into failure during lean periods. Predators, too, are not immune. Jaguars that feed repeatedly in clustered kill zones face higher parasite exposure, particularly from blood-borne organisms carried by insects. The advantage of darkness is real, but it is not free. What makes this dynamic unstable is feedback. Successful hunting near river edges reinforces jaguar preference for those zones on darker nights. Prey losses concentrate there, reducing pressure elsewhere. Over time, animal movement patterns shift. Some species avoid certain bends or banks entirely, while others, less sensitive to risk, continue to use them. This uneven use of space increases the predictability of encounters. Predictability benefits ambush predators, but it also tightens the web of interactions. When something goes wrong, drought, flooding, disease, the effects travel faster along these established pathways. The jungle, under these conditions, does not simply become deadlier, it becomes patchy. Areas of intense activity sit beside zones of relative quiet. Energy flow spikes in one place and thins in another. This patchiness is not inherently bad. It is part of how complex ecosystems function. But when driven repeatedly by the same environmental trigger, extended periods of darker nights, it can push systems closer to thresholds. A disease that might burn out in a dispersed population can persist when hosts and vectors overlap more often. A scavenger population can swell beyond typical bounds, increasing competition and aggression. Even plant communities feel the change as nutrient pulses from carcasses favor certain species over others along the banks. From an evolutionary perspective, the jaguar is not an anomaly here. It is a specialist in exploiting moments when sensory systems fail to align. Its eyesight is strong, but not extraordinary. Its hearing is acute, but not unique. What sets it apart is integration, how it times movement, chooses terrain, and commits only when multiple advantages stack in its favor. Darkness is one of those advantages, but only when paired with landscape features that amplify its effect. The river does that work quietly, shaping behavior without ever appearing hostile. There is a temptation to frame this as a simple story of predator dominance. But the more accurate reading is systemic tension. Every kill strengthens one node of the network while stressing others. Over time, those stresses redistribute life rather than erase it. Some prey species adapt by shifting activity to slightly brighter periods or different habitats. Others alter group size or vigilance behavior. The jaguar responds in turn, adjusting routes and timing. The result is a moving equilibrium that never fully settles. On the darkest nights, when the forest seems muted and the river gives back no light, the jaguar's ghostliness is not about invisibility alone. It is about timing, about arriving when the rules governing detection and reaction are compressed just enough to tilt the outcome. The prey never truly stops seeing or hearing. They simply see and hear too late. And in that narrow window, the ecosystem absorbs another concentrated pulse of death, one that will echo through insects, scavengers, parasites, and pathogens long after the cat has vanished back into the understory. In this way, darkness reshapes the Amazon not by blanketing it in danger, but by tightening its knots. Life clusters where risk feels lowest and pressure feels highest. Stability gives way to hotspots. The jaguar does not create this instability, but it reveals it, turning nights without silhouettes into catalysts for change. What follows is not chaos, but tension, stored in bodies, in movements, and in the quiet accumulation of consequences along the river's edge. The assumption feels intuitive. Darkness falls, visibility drops, and mosquitoes, creatures of night, should surge. More cover, fewer eyes, easier feeding. In the Amazon, that assumption fails almost immediately. Mosquitoes do not experience the night the way humans do, and they do not make decisions based on how dark the forest looks. Their world is chemical, thermal, and fluid, shaped less by light than by breath, sweat, and heat leaking from living bodies. When the sky darkens more than usual, mosquitoes do not simply multiply. They respond to a system that has quietly been knocked out of alignment. A mosquito does not need moonlight to find you. It finds you by reading the atmosphere you disturb. Carbon dioxide pours from lungs in rhythmic plumes, heavier than surrounding air, pooling and drifting with every exhale. Skin releases a constantly changing cocktail of volatile compounds, lactic acid, ammonia, fatty acids, each forming a scent signature that varies by species, diet, health, and even recent activity. Heat rises from exposed skin, creating thermal gradients mosquitoes can sense at close range. These cues are ancient, reliable, and largely independent of light. A mosquito in total darkness can still lock onto a host with terrifying precision. What moonlight changes is not the mosquito's ability to hunt, but the rules governing everything that hunts the mosquito. In the Amazon, mosquitoes exist inside a dense web of predation. Bats sweep the air above streams and clearings. Dragonflies patrol at dusk, exploiting the overlap between day and night. Frogs sit motionless, mouths open, waiting for airborne movement to cross invisible boundaries. Fish snap at larvae, and adults near water surfaces. Even spiders and ants remove mosquitoes incidentally as they move through shared space. None of these predators rely on mosquitoes alone, but together they exert constant pressure, trimming populations before explosive growth can occur. Moonlight modulates that pressure. On brighter nights, some predators pull back. Visibility cuts both ways. Bats become more exposed to owls and other aerial hunters, altering flight routes and timing. Dragonflies, which depend heavily on vision, extend twilight activity when light lingers, but retreat sooner when contrast disappears. Frogs adjust calling behavior based on predation risk, indirectly influencing where insects congregate. Each shift is small, but mosquitoes are exquisitely sensitive to small changes in mortality. Their life cycles are short, their reproductive rates high. A few extra nights of survival can double a local population. A few nights of intensified predation can collapse it. This is where darkness stops being a simple shield and becomes a destabilizer. In some regions of the Amazon, darker nights give bats an advantage. Reduced silhouette visibility allows them to forage earlier and longer, sweeping up enormous numbers of flying insects. Mosquitoes, already weak flyers compared to moths or beetles, are disproportionately removed. The air thins. The familiar high-pitched whine fades. In these zones, people and animals experience fewer bites, not because mosquitoes cannot find hosts, but because fewer survive long enough to try. The night feels quieter, cleaner, almost deceptively safe. A few kilometers away, the opposite happens. Dense canopy, cluttered understory, or heavy rainfall earlier in the evening may suppress bat activity despite the darkness. Dragonflies, unable to operate without visual contrast, retreat entirely. Frogs remain, but their feeding range is limited to ground level and immediate perches. In these pockets, mosquito predators fail unevenly. Survival spikes. Females feed successfully, lay eggs, and exploit standing water left by rain. Larval development accelerates in warm, nutrient-rich pools. Within days, the air thickens. The same darkness that starves mosquitoes in one place feeds them in another. This spatial inconsistency is what breaks stability. In predictable systems, mosquito populations rise and fall with rainfall, temperature, and seasonal cycles. Predators track those cycles closely enough to blunt extremes. When light regimes become erratic, long stretches of darker nights followed by sudden brightness, the feedback loops slip. Predators respond on behavioral timescales. Mosquitoes respond on generational ones. That mismatch allows populations to overshoot or crash before balance can be restored. The consequences ripple outward. Mosquitoes are not just nuisances, they are vectors, prey, and nutrient movers. A surge concentrates blood-feeding pressure on hosts already stressed by heat or dehydration. Animals spend more energy on avoidance behaviors, tail flicking, stamping, skin twitching, energy not spent feeding or resting. Pathogens that rely on mosquitoes find sudden opportunities, while others lose ground when mosquito numbers drop too low to sustain transmission. Even plants feel indirect effects as herbivores alter movement to avoid mosquito-dense zones, changing grazing patterns along riverbanks and clearings. What makes this system especially volatile is that mosquitoes themselves are not uniform. Different species respond differently to the same conditions. Some prefer shaded forest pools, others thrive in sunlit edges. Some feed aggressively at dusk. Others peak in the deepest part of the night. Darkness reshuffles these niches. A blackout period may suppress one species while favoring another, altering the disease landscape without changing total mosquito abundance. To a human observer, it may feel like more mosquitoes or fewer mosquitoes. But the ecological reality is often substitution, not addition. From the mosquito's perspective, the blackout is not a cue, it is background noise. Their sensors continue to read breath, sweat, and heat with relentless accuracy. What changes is how often they are interrupted, how often a flight ends in a bat's mouth, a frog's tongue, or a spider's web. When those interruptions become unpredictable, mosquito populations stop following smooth curves. They lurch. Seasonality begins to blur. Instead of a clear rise during wet months and decline during dry ones, peaks appear early or linger late. A region that should be between seasons experiences a burst. Another enters a lull without obvious cause. For species that rely on seasonal predictability, breeding frogs, migrating birds, mammals timing births to avoid peak parasite loads, this unpredictability is costly. Miss the window, and the penalty is paid in blood loss, infection, or reduced offspring survival. The irony is sharp. Darkness does not inherently favor mosquitoes. In many cases, it empowers their enemies. But because that empowerment is uneven, fragmented by habitat and weather, it produces volatility rather than control. Stability depends on consistency, not intensity. A system where predators are always moderately effective is safer than one where they alternate between overwhelming success and near total absence. This volatility explains why mosquito dynamics in the Amazon can feel so erratic on the ground. One night is unbearable, the next is quiet. The difference is not the mosquito's sensory world, but the invisible choreography of everything else responding to the same sky. People often attribute these swings to chance or bad mosquito luck. In reality, they are living inside a destabilized network, where small shifts in darkness cascade through multiple trophic levels before expressing themselves as bites on skin. Seen this way, mosquitoes are not villains or victims. They are indicators. Their fluctuations reveal how tightly coupled the Amazon's nocturnal systems are, and how sensitive those systems become when a single variable, light, loses its regular rhythm. A blackout does not turn the jungle into a mosquito factory or a mosquito desert. It turns it into a mosaic of extremes, and extremes are what ecosystems handle worst. In the end, the most dangerous aspect of darker nights is not that mosquitoes become more aggressive or more numerous. It is that their seasons stop behaving. When predictability erodes, defenses fail. Not just immune defenses, but behavioral ones evolved around timing. The Amazon does not collapse under these conditions. It adapts, but adaptation carries costs, paid quietly across bodies and generations. The whine in the dark, then, is not a simple signal of abundance. It is a symptom of imbalance. A reminder that in this forest, even the smallest blood feeder is wired into forces far larger than itself, and that when the night loses its rhythm, the consequences spread long before anyone notices the bite. The beach is quiet in the way only remote Australian nesting grounds ever are, not empty, but stripped of human noise. The sand still holds the heat of the day, radiating upward in slow waves as night settles in. Above, the sky is not a glossy dome of moonlight, but a muted gradient of stars and cloud, the moon absent or hidden. This absence matters more than it seems. Beneath the sand, hundreds of green sea turtle hatchlings are waking at once, stirred by falling temperatures and the faint vibrations of their siblings. Their emergence is not a single dramatic burst, but a coordinated loosening of sand as dozens of bodies begin to push upward together, each movement collapsing grains that pull others closer to the surface. When the sand finally breaks, the hatchlings spill out into a world they have never seen, already running on a biological clock that cannot pause. For decades, the popular image has been simple. Hatchlings erupt from the nest and sprint in a straight, desperate line toward the ocean, guided by moonlight reflecting off the water. That image is not wrong, but it is incomplete. On nights like this, when the moon offers no clear signal, the beach becomes something else entirely. The hatchlings do not surge forward as a single arrow. They scatter, some hesitate. Others pivot repeatedly, lifting their heads just enough for their eyes to sample the horizon. Their movements look chaotic, almost confused. But what is unfolding is not failure. It is a sensory system operating at the edge of its reliability. Green sea turtle hatchlings are born with a set of orientation tools that evolved long before artificial light, coastal development, or even predictable moon cycles. Their primary cue is brightness contrast. Under natural conditions, the open ocean reflects starlight and moonlight more strongly than the dark silhouette of dunes and vegetation. When that contrast is strong, the bias is clear and movement is fast. When the contrast weakens, the system does not shut down. It degrades. The hatchlings still respond to light, but the signal-to-noise ratio collapses. Tiny differences in brightness, cloud cover, or even the reflective sheen of damp sand can compete with the ocean's glow. The result is not a wrong direction so much as many weak directions at once. From a distance, the beach seems calm. Up close, it is a lethal obstacle course. Every second a hatchling remains on land, its body begins to lose water. Their skin, designed for marine life, is poorly suited to dry air. Dehydration does not require hours. It begins immediately, thickening the blood and increasing metabolic strain. At the same time, the sand itself becomes a thermal trap. Even at night, surface temperatures can remain high enough to accelerate energy loss. Hatchlings burn through their yolk-derived energy reserves faster than evolution intended, spending fuel meant for their first offshore swim on indecision and reorientation. Predators understand this window with brutal clarity. Ghost crabs emerge from burrows, drawn by vibration and movement. They do not chase so much as intercept, positioning themselves along likely paths and reacting faster than any hatchling can correct its course. Shorebirds, active even in low light, patrol the upper beach, their silhouettes barely visible until they strike. Fish and sharks wait offshore, but their opportunity comes later. On land, the predators are smaller, quieter, and far more efficient. A hatchling that pauses, circles, or doubles back increases its exposure exponentially. Scattering does not confuse predators here, it feeds them. What makes this moment especially unforgiving is that the hatchlings are not behaving randomly. Each is executing the same basic algorithm. Move toward the brightest, lowest horizon. Correct when resistance or slope increases. Avoid dark vertical shapes. But when the primary cue is weak, secondary cues begin to matter more, and those cues are inconsistent. A shallow depression in the sand can trap light and momentarily appear brighter than the true horizon. A low cloud bank can erase the ocean's glow entirely. Even bioluminescent organisms stirred in the surf can pulse unpredictably, creating transient signals that vanish as quickly as they appear. The hatchlings respond because they must. Not responding at all would be worse. The cost of this degraded navigation is time, and time on a beach is measured in losses. Yet the most important consequence does not unfold here, under the stars. It unfolds decades later, far from this shoreline. Green sea turtles are long-lived, slow-maturing animals. A hatchling that reaches the water tonight will spend years, often decades, growing in distant foraging grounds before returning to nest. Mortality at this early stage is expected. The species evolved around staggering losses. But when losses spike beyond historical norms, the effect is delayed and deceptive. Nest counts may look healthy. Adult populations may appear stable. Then, years later, something is missing. Researchers studying long-term turtle populations see this absence as a hollowing out rather than a crash. Fewer subadults appear in foraging grounds. Recruitment slows. The age structure skews older, a subtle warning sign easily missed without sustained monitoring. Because the turtles that die tonight would not have reproduced for decades, their absence does not register until the population needs them most. By the time the gap is visible, the event that caused it is long past, buried in sand and forgotten tides. There is a deeper irony in this vulnerability. The same sensory flexibility that allows hatchlings to survive variable natural conditions is what makes them susceptible when those conditions shift just slightly outside their evolutionary envelope. Their orientation system is not broken on moonless nights. It is operating exactly as designed, averaging weak signals and committing cautiously. In a world without additional stressors, that caution would still deliver enough hatchlings to the sea. But add dehydration pressure, elevated sand temperatures, and dense predator populations near nesting beaches, and the margin collapses. What was once a tolerable delay becomes fatal. This is not a story of disorientation caused by artificial light or obvious human interference. Those threats are real, but they are not the focus here. This is about natural variability interacting with biological limits. Moonless nights have always existed. What has changed is the context in which they occur. Warmer beaches intensify dehydration. Altered predator dynamics increase interception rates. Even subtle changes in sand composition can affect how heat and light are retained at the surface. None of these factors alone guarantee failure. Together, they turn a navigational challenge into a demographic bottleneck. From an ecological perspective, the scattering behavior reveals something important about green sea turtles as a species. They are not optimized for perfect success at birth. They are optimized for persistence over time. The strategy assumes loss and absorbs it across generations. But that strategy depends on losses staying within a certain range. When early life mortality rises quietly, without dramatic die-offs or visible collapse, it undermines the very math that keeps long-lived species stable. The beach does not announce this failure, it erases it. As the night deepens, a few hatchlings finally find the water. The moment their flippers touch the surf, their physiology shifts. Swimming reflexes engage. Osmoregulation begins. The ocean, lethal in its own ways, becomes the safer option. Behind them, the beach smooths over, wind erasing tracks, waves dampening the lower sand. By morning, there will be little evidence of what happened here. No bodies, no markers, just a nest cavity slowly collapsing under its own weight. Years from now, when researchers tally adults on distant reefs or nesting females on this same coastline, the consequences of this night will be invisible. There will be no missing tag, no recorded death, just an absence where abundance should have been. In that sense, the most dangerous moments in the life of a green sea turtle are not the dramatic chases or violent encounters later on. They are the quiet, uncertain minutes at the very beginning, when the world offers too little guidance, and survival depends on finding direction before the sand takes more than the body can afford to lose. The Amazon sky does not simply turn dark, it layers itself. Heat lingers close to the canopy, moisture hangs in the air, and the last scraps of daylight dissolve unevenly. First along the river corridors, then under the forest roof, and finally in the open sky above. On some nights, the moon lifts itself clearly into view, washing the canopy edges in pale contrast. On others, cloud and humidity swallow that light entirely, leaving a darkness that feels heavier, more absolute. These nights do not just look different, they behave differently, and the animals that move through them adjust in ways that quietly reshape the ecosystem. Bats are among the first to notice. Long before human eyes register the absence of moonlight, bats respond to it as a shift in risk. Their world is not defined by darkness versus light, but by visibility. Moonlit skies expose silhouettes, wings become readable shapes against open air, and motion turns into signal for aerial predators, owls, hawks lingering late, even arboreal snakes striking upward. Moonlight is not ambience, it is advantage. Bats evolved under this pressure, and their behavior reflects a constant negotiation between hunger and survival. When the sky brightens, many species delay emergence, shorten foraging bouts, or hug cover more tightly, funneling themselves along cluttered forest edges where echoes are complex but concealment is better. When the sky stays dark, that negotiation shifts. Earlier emergence becomes possible, not because bats see better, but because fewer eyes can see them at all. Darkness flattens contrast, erasing the clean outlines predators rely on. Under these conditions, bats expand their routes. They cross open gaps they would normally avoid, fly higher above the canopy, and remain active longer before retreating to roosts. What looks like freedom is, in reality, a temporary rebalancing of risk, one that favors animals whose primary sensory system is not vision, but sound. Echolocation thrives in darkness not because sound improves, but because competition from vision weakens. Insect wings, vibrating at species-specific frequencies, become acoustic targets rather than visual ones. Water surfaces reflect sonar cleanly, turning rivers into hunting corridors. Canopy gaps act like echo traps, concentrating prey. On darker nights, bats exploit all of this more aggressively. Their flight paths become straighter, less hesitant. Wing beats smooth out as energy efficiency improves, and individuals spend less time looping back to sheltered zones. The result is not just more activity, but more effective activity. The immediate outcome is subtle but measurable: higher insect capture rates. Mosquitoes, moths, beetles, and midges experience sudden, localized pressure that can depress numbers over surprisingly short timescales. This is not extermination, but redistribution. In zones where bats intensify hunting, insects decline, pushing survivors into microhabitats with poorer airflow or denser vegetation. That shift ripples outward. Fewer mosquitoes means fewer blood meals for parasites and pathogens that rely on them. Fewer moths alters pollination patterns for night-blooming plants. Even leaf damage changes when herbivorous insects are forced to feed less or relocate. These changes do not remain isolated to insects. Frogs that specialize in aerial prey adjust calling locations, often moving closer to water where insect density remains higher. Spiders respond by altering web placement, shifting from open flyways to understory corridors where bat pressure is lower. Birds that hunt insects at dawn encounter leaner pickings in areas heavily worked by bats overnight, nudging them to forage longer or expand territories. The ecosystem does not collapse, it flexes, but every flex has a cost, paid in energy, time, or reproductive success. What makes this cascade particularly interesting is that it contradicts a common intuition, that darkness universally favors prey. In the Amazon, darkness is not a blanket of safety, it is a selective amplifier. Animals equipped to operate without vision gain ground, while those dependent on it lose influence. Bats, in this context, are not just beneficiaries of darkness, They are agents of redistribution, reshaping who eats, who waits, and who goes hungry. Yet the story does not end with bats as winners. Darkness also sharpens the tools of other predators, some of which hunt bats themselves. Large owls, whose hearing rivals that of bats in sensitivity, exploit silent flight and acute directional hearing to intercept bats mid-air. On darker nights, these owls shift their hunting height, cruising above canopy gaps where bats feel safest. Arboreal snakes, particularly those that strike upward from branches, benefit from reduced visual warning cues. A bat relying on echolocation may detect a static branch too late if it suddenly becomes a moving mouth. Even parasites take advantage. Bat flies and mites synchronize activity with host movement, increasing transfer rates when bats forage longer. The cost of extended flight time is not only predation risk, but physiological strain. Bats run hot. Their metabolisms spike during sustained flight, generating heat that must be dissipated through wing membranes rich in blood vessels. On humid Amazon nights, heat loss is inefficient. Extended foraging increases dehydration risk, forcing bats to drink more frequently. This pulls them toward water sources where predators concentrate, turning a foraging advantage into a spatial trap. At the population level, these opposing pressures create a complex pattern. Darker nights boost feeding success and short-term condition, particularly for lactating females whose energy demands are extreme. Better-fed mothers produce stronger pups, improving juvenile survival in roosts, but increased exposure to predators and parasites counterbalances those gains. Over time, selection favors bats that fine-tune timing and route choice rather than simply maximizing activity. The result is not uniform behavior, but diversity. Different species, and even individuals within species, carving out distinct responses to the same environmental signal. This diversity matters because bats are not interchangeable components of the ecosystem. Some specialize in mosquitoes, others in beetles, others in fruit or nectar. When darkness favors certain flight strategies, it indirectly favors certain diets. Insect communities respond unevenly, and plants tied to those insects feel the effects later. A reduction in moth pollination can lower seed set months after a period of heavy bat activity, linking nocturnal skies to future forest structure. These connections are easy to miss because they unfold slowly, without spectacle. There is a deeper lesson embedded here. The Amazon does not operate on simple binaries: light good, dark bad, predator strong, prey weak. Instead, it runs on gradients and trade-offs. Darkness removes one kind of risk while intensifying another. It grants opportunity to those equipped to exploit it, but only temporarily, and never without consequence. Bats illustrate this balance with exceptional clarity because they sit at the intersection of so many systems: air and water, insect and mammal, prey and predator. On the darkest nights, when the forest seems momentarily hushed, the sky above is anything but empty. It is crowded with motion too fast and too quiet for human senses to parse. Each wing beat is a decision shaped by millions of years of pressure, recalibrated in real time by cloud cover and lunar absence. What follows from those decisions? Fewer insects here, more frogs there, altered plant reproduction weeks later, is not coincidence. It is the Amazon doing what it always does, converting small changes into wide-reaching consequences. Darkness, in this system, is not merely the absence of light. It is a force that redistributes power. It loosens some constraints while tightening others, favoring animals that can read the world through sound, vibration, and heat rather than sight. Bats do not simply fly through the night. They reshape it. And in doing so, they remind us that the most important ecological shifts are often driven not by dramatic events, but by quiet changes in who can move, who can see, and who becomes visible when the sky decides to stay dark a little longer. On the darkest nights, the forest seems to change its language. Where sound usually dominates, frogs pulsing from hidden pools, insects scraping rhythm into the air, light suddenly takes over. Points appear first in isolation, brief and uncertain, then multiply until the understory seems threaded with signals. The effect is disorienting, almost artificial, as if the jungle has been wired with circuitry. But nothing new has arrived. Fireflies have always been here. What has changed is the noise floor. The moon, normally a constant wash of background brightness, is gone, and without it, the smallest lights finally matter. Fireflies are not casual bioluminescent organisms. Their light is not decoration or accident, it is language. Each species speaks in precise patterns of timing, duration, and color, shaped by sexual selection and constrained by physics. A flash that is too long wastes energy and attracts predators. One that is too short may go unread. Females answer only when the pattern matches exactly, filtering out imposters in a visual environment that is usually crowded with competing signals. Moonlight, reflected starlight, pale leaves, moving water. Under normal conditions, that background noise forces fireflies to work harder for attention. On moonless nights, the rules invert. Without lunar illumination, contrast sharpens. A firefly's flash does not compete with a glowing sky or brightened canopy edges. It punctures the dark cleanly, readable from farther away and against more complex backgrounds. The male's signal carries with less distortion. The female's reply is easier to locate. Courtship accelerates not because fireflies become more active, but because fewer messages are lost. What once required repeated signaling over long intervals now resolves quickly. Pairings form. Energy saved on communication is redirected into reproduction. The biology behind this efficiency is deceptively simple. Firefly light is produced through a chemical reaction involving luciferin, oxygen, and an enzyme that allows extraordinary control over timing and intensity. Unlike most light sources, it generates almost no heat, a crucial advantage in the humid Amazon night, where overheating would be costly. The insects regulate oxygen flow to their light organs, switching illumination on and off with millisecond precision. In bright conditions, that precision is blunted by ambient glare. In darkness, it becomes devastatingly effective. The result is a reproductive pulse. Over successive moonless nights, mating success rises. Females lay more eggs. Larvae densities increase in soil and leaf litter, where they will spend months or even years feeding on soft-bodied invertebrates. Adult fireflies, meanwhile, become more abundant in the air, transforming sections of forest into living signal fields. This is not a uniform glow. It is structured, layered by height, species, and microhabitat. River edges host different patterns than upland forest. Clearings pulse differently than dense understory. To an experienced observer, the night becomes readable again, not through shapes, but through rhythms. With abundance comes attention. Fireflies are conspicuous prey, especially when they dominate the visual field. Spiders adapt quickly. Orb weavers position webs along flight corridors illuminated by frequent flashes, using the insect's own signals as lures. Jumping spiders, equipped with excellent low-light vision, learn to key in on the brief bursts of light, stalking glowing targets with deliberate patience. Frogs shift calling sites toward areas of high firefly density, trading acoustic advertisement for guaranteed food. Even ants exploit fallen or exhausted individuals, dismantling bodies rich in chemical compounds that deter some predators but not all. This new prey availability reshapes micro-food webs. Predators that normally rely on a broader mix of insects can specialize temporarily, increasing feeding efficiency and growth rates. Juvenile frogs benefit disproportionately, gaining size faster and reducing vulnerability to their own predators. Spiders produce more egg sacs. The changes cascade downward as well. Firefly larvae, voracious hunters of snails and worms, increase pressure on decomposers in the soil. Leaf litter processes shift subtly, altering nutrient release patterns that feed plant roots and microbial communities. None of this is chaotic, it is opportunistic. The Amazon excels at converting temporary advantages into short-lived booms, then redistributing the gains. What makes the blackout interesting is not that it helps fireflies, but that it helps them selectively and intermittently. Their advantage exists only when background light drops below a certain threshold. When the moon returns or cloud cover breaks, the signal field collapses back into noise. Predators accustomed to easy meals must adjust again. Larval cohorts already laid will persist, but adult success falls back toward baseline. This pulsing advantage reveals something fundamental about ecological balance. Destruction and creation are often framed as opposites, but in systems like this, they are inseparable. Darkness suppresses species that depend on visual detection or silhouette reading. At the same time, it liberates species whose communication is built entirely around producing their own light. The blackout does not flatten the ecosystem, it reweights it. Winners and losers are determined not by strength or speed, but by sensory design. Fireflies illustrate this more cleanly than most organisms, because their dependence on light is absolute and specific. They cannot switch modalities. They cannot replace visual signaling with sound or scent. Evolution locked them into a narrow channel, and then refined that channel to perfection. When environmental conditions align, that specialization becomes dominance. When they do not, fireflies recede into obscurity, present but barely noticeable. There is an irony here that mirrors patterns seen throughout the forest. Fireflies, often romanticized as symbols of fragility or nostalgia, are in fact beneficiaries of disruption, at least certain kinds of it. A darker night is not a gentler one. Predation risk increases, navigation becomes harder for many animals, yet for fireflies, reduced background light is not stress, but clarity. Their world becomes easier to read, their messages travel farther, their chances improve. This does not mean the boom is unambiguously positive. Increased firefly density attracts predators that may persist even after numbers fall, increasing baseline mortality. Larval competition intensifies, leading to higher attrition later in development. Some species may benefit more than others, shifting community composition over time. And because firefly larvae are predators themselves, their increased abundance can suppress other invertebrates, with knock-on effects that are still poorly understood in tropical systems. What matters is not the direction of change, but its unevenness. The blackout introduces asymmetry. Species built to generate their own signals gain ground. Those dependent on external illumination lose it. The forest becomes patchier, more variable from night to night. For organisms that evolved under relatively predictable lunar cycles, this variability is destabilizing. For specialists like fireflies, it is opportunity. Seen from a distance, the glowing forest might look enchanted, even celebratory. Up close, it is a battlefield of information. Every flash is both invitation and risk. Predators learn, prey adapt, energy moves. The system does not pause to admire the spectacle, it exploits it. In this sense, the blackout does not contradict the narrative of danger explored elsewhere in the forest. It completes it. Darkness is not purely destructive, nor purely protective. It is selective. It strips advantages from some and hands them to others, reshuffling interactions that normally remain hidden behind more stable conditions. Fireflies remind us that not all life waits for light to survive. Some life is engineered to replace it. When the moon eventually returns, the signals fade back into background noise. The forest's visual language quiets, replaced once more by sound and shadow. But the effects linger, in egg clusters buried in soil, in spiders heavier with prey, in frogs grown larger than expected for the season. The blackout leaves no scar you can point to. It leaves imbalance, stored quietly in bodies and numbers. And that is the deeper truth these lights reveal. In the Amazon, even beauty is functional, even wonder is work. When darkness clears the channel, those built to speak in light do not hesitate. They flood the night with meaning, and for a brief moment, the forest answers. At night, the river loses its edges. In northern Australia, when the moon withdraws and cloud thickens the dark, the water's surface turns into a single, unbroken plane. Reflections vanish, ripples flatten into invisibility. What remains is a black sheet that looks inert, almost empty, as if depth itself has been switched off. For animals that live by reading silhouettes and surface disturbance, this darkness feels like relief. The crossings look safer. The banks feel quieter, and for a brief window, confidence creeps back into movements that are normally tense, delayed, or avoided entirely. That confidence is misplaced. Saltwater crocodiles do not experience the river as a visual space. Their world is built from pressure, vibration, and chemistry. Eyes matter, but they are not primary. Sensory pits along the jaws detect minute changes in water displacement. Internal organs tuned to salinity register shifts between freshwater runoff and tidal intrusion. Even temperature gradients matter, influencing metabolism, positioning, and readiness to strike. Moonlight does not change what the crocodile perceives. It changes what everyone else believes. On brighter nights, prey animals behave cautiously at water edges. Kangaroos, feral pigs, wallabies, buffalo, even cattle hesitate before drinking or crossing. They scan. They wait. They break into smaller groups. Movement is staggered, unpredictable. On darker nights, that choreography tightens. Without visible contrast, hesitation feels pointless. If danger cannot be seen, animals default to routine. They approach in clusters, choosing familiar access points where banks slope gently or vegetation offers footing. The absence of light compresses decision-making, and that compression reshapes traffic. Tides quietly reinforce this effect. In northern Australian rivers, saltwater influence reaches far inland, pushing and pulling with lunar gravity even when the surface looks calm. Slight changes in tidal height alter where sandbars form, where banks are undercut, and where shallows expose themselves. Animals do not calculate tides, but they respond to outcomes. A crossing that was easy last week becomes deeper. A drinking spot that offered solid ground softens into mud. Over time, prey converge on access points that feel consistently reliable. Dark nights accelerate this convergence by reducing exploration. Why test alternatives when nothing can be clearly seen? Crocodiles notice immediately. A large saltwater crocodile does not patrol randomly. It learns. It maps pressure patterns, memorizes current shifts, and remembers where vibrations repeat. On darker nights, the repetition intensifies. Footsteps enter the water at the same angles. Bodies wade in at the same depth. Panic splashes break the surface in familiar places. The crocodile adjusts positioning by centimeters, aligning its body with the predicted path of entry. When the strike comes, it is not rushed. It is timed to the moment prey commits its weight to water. The kill rate rises, not because crocodiles become more aggressive, but because the system feeds them certainty. Successful ambushes reinforce site fidelity. Crocodiles linger near productive banks longer, reducing hunting effort and increasing energy efficiency. A well-fed crocodile can afford patience. It can wait days between strikes, choosing optimal conditions rather than reacting impulsively. Darkness in this context is not concealment. It is schedule compression. The immediate aftermath of a kill is rarely visible for long. Blood disperses quickly in moving water. Carcasses are consumed or dragged under. What remains is behavioral memory. Prey animals that witness or narrowly escape an attack shift their movement patterns abruptly. Entire groups may abandon a river bend or refuse to drink at a previously favored site. Fear zones relocate, sometimes overnight. This relocation concentrates pressure elsewhere, pushing more hooves and feet into fewer access points upstream or downstream. These shifts have physical consequences. When animals cluster repeatedly at new sites, banks degrade faster. Vegetation is trampled before roots can stabilize soil. Mudslides into the river, increasing turbidity. Erosion accelerates, reshaping channels and altering flow. The river becomes wider and shallower in places, deeper and faster in others. These changes feed back into crocodile behavior, opening new ambush angles and closing old ones. The landscape itself becomes part of the predator-prey arms race. Thermoregulation adds another layer. Crocodiles are ectothermic, relying on external heat to regulate body temperature. Dark nights often follow hot days, when water retains warmth longer than air. Crocodiles exploit this thermal inertia, positioning themselves where temperature gradients favor rapid muscle response. Prey entering cooler water may experience momentary shock or stiffness, further narrowing reaction windows. Again, the effect is subtle. Again, it is decisive. The system does not spiral endlessly. Over time, prey redistribute more evenly or adjust timing, approaching water during marginally brighter periods or at higher tide when depth reduces strike angles. Crocodiles respond in turn, altering basking schedules and ambush depth. But every reset carries cost. Energy is burned in learning. Mistakes are paid for in flesh. And during extended periods of darker nights, the resets lag behind reality. The schedule has changed faster than behavior can adapt. What makes this dynamic particularly dangerous for large mammals is that saltwater crocodiles do not need repeated success to maintain dominance. A single, well-publicized kill can alter movement across kilometers of riverbank. Fear spreads faster than individuals do. This creates long stretches of underused shoreline and small zones of intense pressure. Ecological balance gives way to spatial imbalance. Grazing patterns shift inland. Vegetation recovers unevenly. Some banks collapse while others overgrow. The river becomes less stable, not because predators are overabundant, but because timing has slipped out of sync. This is the deeper meaning of the moon in this system. It is not illumination, it is metronome. Lunar cycles regulate tides, light, and by extension confidence. Animals evolve to move when those signals align predictably. When the signal weakens or disappears, routines harden instead of flexing. Crocodiles, with their long lifespans and slow metabolisms, exploit that rigidity. They wait out confusion. They profit from habit. From a distance, a pitch-black river looks empty, silent, safe. Up close, it is crowded with information the human eye cannot read. Pressure waves intersect. Chemical trails drift. Thermal layers stack and slide. The crocodile sits within this invisible architecture, tuned to patterns that darkness sharpens rather than erases. Prey animals feel only the absence of warning, not the presence of danger. In the end, the river does not become more violent, It becomes more punctual. Kills happen where and when schedules align, not where vigilance is highest. The moon's role is not decorative, nor romantic. It structures time. When that structure fades, animals fall back on habit, and predators built for patience take advantage. The lesson is quiet but uncompromising. In Australia's rivers, safety is not determined by what can be seen, but by whether the clock is still running as expected. When the moon stops keeping time, the water keeps its own, and it is a schedule written for ambush.